launch party for Astrid Sees All. Truly, thank you so much for being here. I know that many of you plan to watch a recorded version of this talk later, so welcome to y'all in the future as well. Before I welcome Darcy Steinke and Natalie Standiford, I want to tell you a little bit about the Country Bookshop in Southern Pines, North Carolina. We're a general bookstore for kids and adults that has been serving our community for almost 70 years. We're unique in that for the last 10 years, the bookshop has been part of a small community, twice weekly, award-winning newspaper called The Pilot. So we're here, and actually, truly, all bookstores only exist because y'all choose to shop with us. And especially at the Country Bookshop, we truly delight in helping with highly personalized selections for all ages. So call us, find us online, pop in the store. We're here to serve you. And I will post a link to buy an autographed copy of this book with a book plate in the chat. And that's where you can also comment during the webinar. And also, if you have any questions, there's a little Q&A thing down at the bottom. And so just put your questions in there. And towards the end, we will do our best to get to them. Now, before this starts, let me quickly introduce the women you have all been waiting for. Darcy Steinke is the author of the memoir, Easter Everywhere, and 5 novels, Sister Golden Hair, Milk, Jesus Saves, Suicide Blonde, and Up Through the Water. Her books have been translated into 10 languages, and her nonfiction has appeared widely. Her web story, Blind Spot, was a part of the 2000 Whitney Biennial. She has been both a Henry Hoynes and Stigner Fellow and a writer in residence at the University of Mississippi. She has taught at the New School, Columbia University School of the Arts, New York University, Princeton, and the American University of Paris. She lives with her husband in Brooklyn. Natalie Standiford was born and raised in Baltimore and studied Russian language and literature at Brown. She lives in New York City and plays bass in several rock bands with other restless writers. She writes books for adults, children's, and teens, and her essays and reviews have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and elsewhere. Astrid Sees All is the first book Natalie Standiford has published for adults, and today is the launch date for this book, which is an IndieNext top pick for April. And I want to welcome y'all. I've been seeing you guys on social media, and I have to ask to start, I saw this picture y'all posted of the two of y'all in a rock band at some point, like in New York. So how do y'all know each other? I'm so excited to hear you chat. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
I'm so happy to be here.
Kimberly.
Natalie is one of my very best friends. So this is really meaningful for me. Do you want to do Ruffian or should I, Nat?
Well, first, I remember how we met, maybe better than you do.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I saw an ad in Publishers Weekly asking for volunteers, children's authors, to volunteer to work in the schools, in the New York City public schools. So I volunteered, and Darcy happened to be running that program at the time.
Exactly, yeah.
So we started going on, having these long car rides to schools all over the city with other people.
Yeah.
And we both lived in Brooklyn Heights at the time.
Right, that's right. And
friends.
it was like a natural match,
Yeah.
We were so amazing in the classroom with the 3rd graders too. I remember that. And then Ruffian started because in our best friend group, which is Nat and I, and then Renee Steinke, who's an amazing novelist, and Biz Mitchell, who's an amazing nonfiction writer, we were all going through divorces. And we were a little sick of just meeting and drinking wine and talking about our divorce. And so Biz, who has a very strong life force energy, was like, let's just start a band, because then we can work out all these emotions in music. It'll be more interesting for us, right? So Natalie was the only one who had played cello, right? In high school, right?
Violin.
Yeah, violin. So she was the only musician, and she is a very strong, probably the strongest musician, I would say, in Ruffian. And so we got our very punk rock. I got my guitar, Biz got her guitar, Renee got a Farfisa, a old antique keyboard. And we just started to try to play songs. You know what I mean? It was crazy. The first time we rented they rent by 2 hours, like the practice studios in New York City. And I can remember being on the phone and being like, we can't practice for 2 hours. We can only practice for like 20 minutes, But eventually within about a year, right? We started to play very punk rock, rudimentary, but cool, We started
This is already the coolest story I've ever heard.
Yeah, when we started to play, like we played the Mercury Lounge, which is not too shabby, right? Where else did we play, Nat?
We played Arlene's Grocery, Lounge.
It's a real band.
It was a real band. Yeah, it was real. I mean, it was like, it was weird. It was like, I mean, we were so like, we were really good at writing lyrics. You know what I mean?
Because we were all writers.
Yeah. I can remember one time we actually played the AWP once, which is kind of funny to think about. And I remember somebody coming and saying they were like, you guys are good, but you guys are like scary, smart lyricists. So that was good. So it's one of the joys of my life to have been. I still feel like I'm a member of Ruffian, but
well, we call ourselves Ruffian still. Like we get together for dinner and it's a Ruffian dinner.
Yeah. I still hope someday too, when everybody's like kids are out of the house and people have more time, and we can still maybe get back to it. So we'll see what happens.
Well, now that you're talking about it on this platform, you have to, because now people are going to start looking it up and wanting to see you guys.
Yeah, but there's not a lot out there, which might be good. Yeah.
So now we have to talk about books.
Let's do it. Okay, ready? All right. So I just want to thank you for having us, Kimberly. I'm like so thrilled to be having this conversation.
I want to thank both of you.
It's like just so great. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everybody. And I thought that we could start with Natalie just reading real like a little, like a page or something. And then I have a bunch of questions.
Certainly. I have, a very short little section I can read that doesn't need any, here's my glasses.
Yeah, good.
Doesn't need any setup really.
Okay.
It's the beginning of chapter 5 called Chanterelle, which was the name of a restaurant in New York that Phoebe Hayes, she's the main character. She's going to go on a date later in this chapter with someone. But before that, she is just talking about how she thinks about herself.
Mm-hmm.
She's the story, Phoebe narrates the story.
Mm-hmm.
She's living in New York. She's living in the East Village and looking back on the past year and what has happened during that year when she graduated from college, moved to New York, did a lot of foolish things. Her father died and she had a bad reaction to that. And her mother wanted to keep her at home because she didn't think she was emotionally strong enough to go back to New York. But Phoebe felt like she had to go back to New York because she had gotten this job telling fortunes at a nightclub called Plutonium. And she didn't want to miss that chance. So she runs away from her mother's house and doesn't tell her mother where she's living. And she moves to the East Village with her best friend, Carmen. But this section is more about her childhood. In middle school, I knew of a girl named Kiki who claimed she'd spent the summer as an Aerosmith groupie. Her mother was a belly dancer. Kiki could do a head slide, that I Dream of Jeannie thing, where you move your head from side to side. I can't do it. From the rest of your body. She was a grade ahead of me, and we weren't friends. She wouldn't have been friends with me. She smoked clove cigarettes and sipped Coke spiked with Southern Comfort out of a 7-Eleven cup. I practiced aerial cartwheels on the front lawn and translated picture books into French for fun. She lived in a world where 14-year-olds were groupies, and I lived in bubble wrap. When I got to college and read Lolita, I finally understood the difference between me and Kiki. She was a nymphette, and I was not. I lacked the necessary traits identified by Nabokov as an elusive, shifty, soul-shattering, insidious charm, and instead was doomed to be one of the dull, wholesome children Humbert Humbert despised. I am not saying that I wish I'd been a teenage Aerosmith groupie, but in the lives of neglected kids who grew up too fast, as my mother liked to say, I saw, until recently, not pain, but glamour. To me, a girl who felt smothered. Neglect looked like freedom. I spent my first months in New York wondering when something was finally going to happen to me. I wanted something big, good, bad, I didn't care, as long as it shook me until my head spun. Something to make a good story out of my life, and something big enough to recapture Carmen's interest. Then I met Ivan. Here at last was my chance at the seedy glamour I'd always yearned for.
It was great. So good. Okay, let's get started. I have so many questions. I don't know if I'll get to all of them. But I thought we could just start with, I always like to hear when I hear people talk about their books, how did the book get started? Actually, for you, what was your first idea, or what was the thing that kind of drove you to start?
Yeah, I was thinking about, I've written children's books that are set in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and it just felt like time to write about the next step right after college. And I was thinking about myself at that age and remembering all the foolish things that I had done, these sort of unnecessarily risky things and inexplicably stupid things. But I still felt like what I remembered, there were reasons for all those things that I did.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I started thinking about, I'd also been listening to a Jungian podcast, and they were talking about different myths. And I was thinking about Persephone, the little girl who was kidnapped by Hades and taken to the underworld. And she stays down there and eventually becomes queen of the underworld before she comes back up after her mother finds her. And they make this deal about half the year is going to be winter and half the year is going to be summer. She has to go back half the year. And it resonated with me. That myth resonated with me because I thought, when I was that age, I wanted to go to the underworld. I felt like I had to go there, but I couldn't grow. I think it's part of growing up for girls to have a phase where they kind of go into some kind of underworld. And the East Village in the 80s was like a perfect underworld.
Right. I think that's
a
right.
place to set a novel and to set that story.
Yeah. Yeah. The darkness, the dark period, right? The dark period, the dark years of your 20s, right?
Yeah, it's dark, but also really fun and also glamorous.
Very glamorous. Yeah, I agree with that too. I recognize all those things. All right, let's talk about, I think I love that the book sort of focuses on all these relationships, but the friendship between Phoebe and Carmen is something that really interests me. And it reminded me of a lot of friendships in my own 20s where the, very intense female friendships that were almost kind of, they weren't sexual, but they were almost kind of romantic. There was so much, you had so much in common. You were so young. Life was so exciting. And they could be very intense as well. And I think that's sort of how how Carmen and Phoebe are. And I thought you could talk a little bit about that, about female friendships in your novel. And
yeah, Phoebe meets this girl, Carmen, in college. And Phoebe grew up in Baltimore, and she gets to Brown, and the kids who are from New York fascinate her. She just thinks they know so much more than she does. And Carmen is one of these girls who's from New York, and she just seems so confident, and she's so cool, and she knows so much more than Phoebe does. And Phoebe sort of idolizes her and wants to be like her. And then they become friends. And then their relationship becomes kind of a roller coaster where one betrays the other, then turns it around. They're sort of there for each other, then they're not. But I think at least when I was that age, I had boyfriends, but to be honest, guys that age are not
they're hard to connect to emotionally. Hello.
They are seriously, I think, before as someone to be really intimate with.
Right, exactly.
Not always.
And there's exceptions. And they may be better now because they maybe have had some better mothering, but I think I always think to myself about the 20s, how much I talked on the phone endlessly, which was now I can see partly because we didn't have social media and the computer and all this stuff. Right. But yeah, those long phone calls, sometimes with boyfriends, but often with girlfriends or just friends, partly because like you've left your family and the emotional support of the family, you know, and then you're a little, you know, it's like, it's not completely easy to attach, you know, sometimes to a 23-year-old man, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, but there's a lot of like long, you know, like trying to work out your emotions, you know, get some support for your emotions in all these different ways, you know?
Yeah. And I think another young woman can understand you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you can connect that way. And also you learn from each other, like
Learn from each
sort
other.
of
Yeah.
trading your experiences and
Right.
going out together and expand, like what happens if we get dressed up this way and then go out, and
Yeah.
you know, what happens if we flirt with these boys? But
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
sort of your partner in crime, trying to
Right.
figure out, you know, what you want to be, who you want to be.
Yeah. I mean, it can also be because, you know, the 20s are so, you know, I was, you know, serial monogamy was my thing, you know, so like the male, you know, the cis relationships can be like short, you know,
Yeah.
short standing. So like that gives you a little more stability too. Like the girlfriends can like, you know, kind of be overarching over that time, you know.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
there's something really cool about that. Yeah, I mean, female friendship is so important. I actually think even like now, I mean, we won't talk about this for too long, but even like at our age, I feel like friendship is coming back like to be a very important thing too. Like once I mean, like you don't have kids, but once your kids are gone, and I don't know, it's like a good time to kind of be close to your friends, to your girlfriends again, I think. You know,
Yeah.
your 50s, yeah, your 50s, yeah.
Well, also there are biological things that you go through that, you know, one gender goes through and the other doesn't,
Right.
and sort of connect about that too. Changes,
Yeah.
adolescence or midlife or whatever.
Or menopause, right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think so you can talk about like what your body's doing and also, yeah, and also just kind of where you're at, right? Yeah, I think that's really true. Okay, let's see. So we were both in our 20s in the 1980s. I didn't come to New York to 1989 actually, but I actually even in through the early 90s, some of the same places in Natalie's books were really, you know, was really the places that we would go as well. But I thought that we could talk about like what, I mean, I want to get to the, like my next question will have to do with the Lower East Side and, you know, the East Village specifically as a character in the book. But before that, I thought we could just talk about the 1980s as like, I mean, we've talked about this before, but the sort of menace that we would feel sometimes as young women, you know, and not just in the East Village, but like, and not just in New York, you know, I mean, but
Yeah.
the sort of general menace, and also the way, like, you know, I think when I was in my 20s at that time in the 80s, I don't think I went out of the house where someone wouldn't say, like somebody wouldn't say something to me, a man wouldn't say something to me, you know, whether it was positive or negative. Like it was very much like a, and just the general menace that I know was very real for me. And I thought, you know, maybe like you could speak about that a little bit.
Yes. I think we took it for granted a little bit.
Yeah.
That whenever you walked around the streets, if you were by yourself or even not by yourself, you just had to kind of watch out, and you never knew who could approach you or what could happen. And
Right.
I wanted to get that feeling across
Mm.
in the book. But there's a sort of shock at the end that I don't want to give away, but that has something to do with that
Right.
I think, you know, there was real danger that you really did have to take seriously, and that did kind of cloud over your life. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to ignore that and just have them having fun. The character.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, part of the reality of your book and the strength of it is that you captured that. I mean, you know, the way that, you know, that menace that was like sort of just a part of a young female life at that time. And I don't know, like, you know, I have a 25-year-old daughter, and I don't really know if she feels that now as much. I certainly hope not. I mean, I'm sure there's like her own things to deal with, but it was very palpable. I mean, I think, you know,
Thank you. Yeah.
it's really good though. And then, all right, so let's talk about the East Village. All right, so you lived in the East Village for a long time. How long did you live in the East Village altogether?
Well, I lived in the East Village for a couple of years, and then I lived on the Lower East Side, like
Yeah, right.
for about 20 years.
20 years, yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, until 6 years ago.
Yeah.
7 years ago, I guess.
Remember when, to go back to Ruffian quickly, remember when our shoes got stolen?
Yeah, I think about that all the time
And
because
what, tell me, like, let's just lay out the story. So what happened again? We were in we were in your apartment getting ready, right? And it was snowy, right?
we were playing a show at Mercury Lounge.
Right.
It was a snowy day,
Mhm.
and we were all dressed up for the show, but we
Right.
had to wear snow boots because it was so
Right, right.
We went for our sound check, and then I lived close to the Mercury Lounge, so everyone came to my house, my apartment, after between the sound check and the show.
Right.
We took off our snowy shoes and left them in the hallway because they were all wet. And then when we got ready to go back to Mercury Lounge, the shoes were all gone.
And then what
had stolen them.
And then I can't remember what we did. Did we just wear our?
I gave you like I had a bunch of shoes.
But your shoes were too little for all of us. I remember that too, right?
Well, I think you squeezed your feet in or something. I mean, you had to wear something.
That was such a funny story. But let's talk a little bit about the East Village. I know, even though I never lived in the East Village, I always lived in Brooklyn. I was like an early, like, Brooklyn adoptee. But I think there's a sense too that, you know, before Brooklyn was Brooklyn, you know, that's where the Lower East Side, and, you know, that was really Brooklyn. I mean, it was like a village. There were all kinds of interesting little stores and characters, and like I mean, the thing about Brooklyn that's cool is each neighborhood is like a little village. And I think that, I mean, where I learned that was the best way to live was by going to the East Village and going to the bars there, and going to the clubs there, and shopping for clothes there. It was very exciting to, like, that my very first, like, sort of not very expensive, but you know, designer, you know, originally designed stuff. Remember Daryl K? Like, you could actually, you know, buy something that looked like someone had made that was really interesting looking. You know, that was so fun. But I thought that you do such an amazing job in the book of making the East Village a character, both the 1980s and the Lower East Side a character. And I thought that maybe you could talk about, I like to talk about this for a while because I think it's such a rich topic. So let's start, because I have a lot of actually sidebars too, but maybe you could talk about your own 1980s experiences in the Lower East Side.
So in the book, Phoebe moves there with her friend Carmen, but when I moved there, it was with my college boyfriend. It was a very different experience. I mean, the book is not autobiographical.
Of course. Yeah.
At all. But I did take things that I remembered. So I lived on Avenue A between 9th and 10th, which is where Carmen and Phoebe live. Like, well, I know what it's like to live there, and might as well have them live there.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Across from Tompkins Square Park. And there was this shop, just like in the book, on the first floor. It was actually called Badislavia, and these two young women owned it, and they were so cool. I was afraid to talk to them, and they lived in the building. We sublet an apartment from Louise Bourgeois' son.
Wow.
And so we were taking care of their cats and living with these bourgeois sculptures in this apartment on Avenue A.
Amazing. You never told me that. I forgot. I might have forgotten. That's amazing.
Yeah. So it was really cool.
Yeah.
But like Avenue B, you could go to Avenue B. We wouldn't really go into the park very much. And maybe we'd go to Avenue B, but beyond that, you didn't go, except, you know, ABC, that was this really cool club in the middle of 8th Street between B and C. Nothing else was on the entire block. It was all
ABC Berea, right?
No, that's on Rivington Street.
Oh, that's Rivington Street one.
ABC was on 8th Street between B and C. It was like a performance space bar, just by itself. I don't think it had a liquor license or anything. It didn't last very long, but it was in the middle of this totally bombed out block, and you would like walk down on like broken glass and stuff, and then you would go in, and then there would be, you know, Japanese no theater or something happening.
Yeah,
it was like, I guess because it was this sort of half-formed place.
Yeah.
All these empty buildings, people could do all kinds of creative things.
Right.
it didn't cost a lot of money, and there was so much
Right.
experimentation.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Because the rent was so cheap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
And there was this disdain for money in a way. Like, it's not like people didn't want money, but if you tried to buy your way into a club or something, it was not cool. Like,
Yeah.
or if you showed up in a limousine and thought that would impress someone, like that,
Yeah, it's true.
it was like bad to
That
show
was
up.
very much in my world too. I mean, also even like it was much better to have a thrift store find than it was to buy something new, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing wasn't like, you know, like wealth, a certain kind of wealth or money wasn't really the main thing that everybody rotated around.
Right. It was just
Yeah.
like, were you outrageous or interesting?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. Um, so let's talk about Phoebe in the East Village. Like what I liked about her relationship to the East Village is it sort of reminds me of my own relationship to all the neighborhoods I've lived in actually, like in New York. It's like I feel like, I'm sure this is how everyone feels, you know, no matter where they live, but like you have your human relationships, but then in a way you also have your, you know, depending on what, you know, the time of your life and what neighborhood you're in, you sort of have your relationship with the city as well, right? It's like
Yeah.
another, I mean, I've often thought that like I have a bunch of, I mean, now actually a lot of them are passing, but I've always had a lot of older friends actually from the read aloud, you know, from that, from when we first met, there was like,
Mhm.
Esther Hotzig, Mary Cohen. And I always was impressed when I would go have dinner with them, what rich lives they'd have, by like it. And like, it was, even if it was hard for them to be lonely because they always had New York. You know what I mean? And I actually thought that that's one thing I liked about Phoebe. It seems like Phoebe is like at the very beginning of her relationship with the city. You know what I mean? It's like a new
Yes.
relationship. Yeah. And I really admired that. Like how she's building, she has everything else going on actually on her life as well, but she's starting to build her relationship with the city.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like the East Village probably still is somewhat, but it was really like a village, and you just
Mhm.
see people on the street. There weren't that many places to go. Everyone
Yeah.
went to the same places. And so yeah, like there's this character Bix who's sort of a drug dealer, club going guy
Mhm.
that she becomes friends with, and she just very open to, like, she'll be friends with, she wants to know what everyone's like.
Right. Yeah. Right. Sort of the beginning of that, maybe like less judgmental place.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Which is sort of like, which leads to such rich life experience. I mean, it can lead to dangerous life experience as well, but also
Yeah.
rich life experience. Right.
She doesn't have a lot of discretion, like, or, like she meets people who don't live in a very healthy way, and
Yeah.
that's fine with her. She
Mhm.
just wants to know, like, well, what is that like? What happens if you do that?
Right. Yeah.
And I
Right.
think when she's older, maybe she won't want to be friends with people who do lots of cocaine all the time and stuff.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's another thing I wanted to talk about that I loved about the book was that it brought back the way that in your 20s, and I think in New York, and I mean, I'm sure this could be true other places too, but like how you have a lot of like social mobility, like you're like, because you have no standing in a way, like you both, you can like hang out with, people that are barely making it, that are really struggling, that are like either on drugs. And then like in your book, you actually have like, I know it's a college, like kind of scene, I think, but you even have like John Kennedy makes an appearance, but I think in your 20s, you have a lot of like, I mean, to me, that was like one of the things that made the 20s really exciting too, right? Is that you have the ability to like sort of be in many different worlds pretty comfortably. And so you really don't have to have earned your place there.
Right. You just show up.
Yeah. And you're also, I guess you're young and people are nice enough to include you. And like, it's very different. I think, I feel like the social world becomes very different, like as you get older in New York, but
Yeah.
that was something that I think your book captures that really well too. I think that, I think your 20s is a time where there's a lot of like, I mean, kind of like you're saying, mixing up with a wide variety of kinds of people, like kind of lifestyles, those kind of things.
Yeah. I guess some people sort of take young people on as pets.
Yeah, I think they do. Or you're so adorable. I mean, I remember I went to, again, because the read aloud, I mean, as you're making this, is Mary Rogers, you know, who wrote Freaky Friday,
Yeah.
and was the daughter of Rogers and Hammerstein Rogers. Were you at her party too, her Christmas party?
No.
No. Okay, well, she invited me to her Christmas party, and I went, and it was just like star-studded, man. It was crazy. Like, I barely could, like, I was like, like, I remember one time the phone rang and we were in a bedroom and somebody said to me, "Get that." And I'm like, all right. And it was, it was George in the Park. What's the guy? Sondheim. and then Sondheim came over. I was just like, wow. Okay. But it made it so exciting, you know, like that, like you never knew like what your life might hold, you know. I mean, I think that was an exciting thing for my 20s.
But I think that's also why Phoebe wants to move to New York.
Yeah.
Because when she goes to college, she meets, like, there's a girl in her dorm who was from New York, who worked at like a bakery or something.
Yeah.
In the summers, and a movie star used to come in and ask her out every day. And Phoebe was just like, what? You know?
Those stories have so much appeal.
When she worked at the Baskin Robbins in her neighborhood, that would not happen. And it's this idea, I think it's true about New York, that
it is true.
when you step out the door, you could meet anyone.
Yeah, you can.
Anything can happen. And
you find yourself, you find, not like, because I mean, I'm not like a particularly fancy person, and it doesn't happen that often, but you can find yourself even now, like a few times a year in really weird, interesting situations with very fascinating people, like well-known or not, you know what I mean? Like, it's like,
I've seen Natalie Portman sobbing into her phone on the street, you know, sad, but
but still, there's something to it, right? Yeah.
I mean, you see little things like that.
I know. Okay, let's talk about, I don't know, I think, all right, I have my one kind of dark question I feel like I want to do, and then we can do a couple more upbeat ones. But so the thing, I liked everything about the book, but like one thing that really moved me about the book, I like emotionally, in some ways was because Phoebe goes through a lot of things that I think if I went through them, I would feel a lot of some shame anyway. Like, you know, there's some things that they're not really shameful, but I would feel a lot of shame. A lot of shame is attached to them, you know. And it really moved me in the book that Phoebe doesn't really seem to have that much shame about the things that happen to her. She sort of is, you know, they happen to her. She gets, you know, angry. She might get sad, but she doesn't seem to like really dwell like in this place of conventional shame. And that to me was a breath of fresh air. Like it was very moving to see her have things happen to her and not be crushed by her own self-negation. And I thought, I was, you know, wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
I didn't think about it really. That's interesting to hear. I think that is true. It might be in some ways a gift I'm giving her from my position as, you know, being much older and wiser than she is. And seeing like, oh, she shouldn't be ashamed of that, but maybe she really should be. But then on the other hand, I like the idea that is a character that it's just these things happen and she's just like, I have had friends like that who are so matter of fact about bodily functions and all kinds of things, and they're not embarrassed and they're not ashamed. They just talk about them. Right. And so I guess maybe I wanted her to be like one of those. Yeah,
it was sort of aspirational in a way too, right? Like
I know.
Yeah, I found that to be, and I found that to be very feminist too. Like that, like why should she feel shame about these things? She's just, these things are happening. Sometimes there's something that there's a choice of hers, but sometimes not. And why should she be crushed by her own shame? I just thought that was like, it really helped me when I read the book a lot. Like I found that to be very like freeing. I mean, I always think that like, I mean, I know the way, like the main reason I write my books is to be more free, you know what I mean? And I also hope to make other people more free, like with my books, you know, so, and I definitely helped me be more free. So
I'm very glad.
So thank you for that.
I hope it will work for other people.
I think it will. I think if you read it, you might be more free. So let's just talk about the divination in the book. The way, Phoebe is she gets a job as a fortune teller. It's a very unique kind of fortune telling. Do you want to tell about it? Can you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah. When I first was writing this book, first she was a palm reader because that was the best thing I could think of. And then I was listening to some podcast where there was a tarot card reader talking about how you could use anything as tarot cards. It's a matter of having something with imagery that you can project upon or that summons images or memories in you.
Right.
So I had this idea of the movie tickets. She collects these movie tickets, and it's true that if you think about a movie, even if you haven't seen the movie, the title can sometimes be enough. But if you have seen the movie, then just the title brings this whole huge group of associations, the story, the actor, character, setting. So I was very excited when I thought of that because it was boring to write about palm reading and really hard to describe.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking like the practice of trying to tell people's fortunes by pulling these movie ticket stubs and thinking about what they mean was somehow clarifying for her. Like it was in a way, how when you write, it sort of helps you clarify your thoughts.
Totally.
That it was for her in a way, sort of a way of making what you think concrete.
Right.
Clear to you or what you feel. And actually, I have this box.
I was thinking, well, maybe you should do me. Actually, maybe you should do me at the end if we have extra time. Do you want
will. It has all these.
Amazing.
I don't have any. I didn't actually save ticket stuff, so I had to cut out a lot of titles.
I love it. And so, were you interested as an actual person, a younger person? Were you interested in the idea of divination or like the I Ching or horoscopes and things like that?
I was mildly interested, and when I was a senior in high school, when we were learning about Chinese history, and one of my teachers taught us about the I Ching, and he decided to do it with us in class. So he said, ask a question, and then he threw these coins, and so we were waiting to hear from colleges. So, and Brown was my first choice, and I wanted to get in there, and I was nervous. So I asked, will I get into Brown? And he said, well, you have to give me an image to work with. What do you think of when you think of it? And I said, well, I think of the quad. So he threw the coins and he read a passage from it, and it was like everything the four seasons, the wind, the four sides. And I thought, and he said, you said quad. And it was positive, and he said, I think you're going to get in. And then I did get in, so I thought, okay, something is in there.
That's good. Yeah. And my daughter is interested in, like many women or many people in her generation, that horoscopes have become a thing that are more popular now than they were even a few years ago, I'd say. And why do you think that is? Why do you think there's been a move towards some of these like these divinations that are so like compelling for people?
It's an interesting question because it definitely has exploded.
Yeah, it has.
In astrology, especially among younger people. I don't really know why. I mean, is it maybe something about, the truth has become so relative?
Yeah.
Like our truth, and there's QAnon truth, and there's,
right.
And the way that we receive information is so kind of geared towards what we're interested in because of the way the internet algorithms work and stuff. And I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like, if you think, well, the stars are what they are, the way they move is the way they move. That doesn't change. It's this.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. I don't know either. I think it's interesting. I mean, I sometimes think it maybe is because maybe religion of, less people are interested in having a like religious grid, or at least don't go to church. And like, it is helpful to have something to push your feelings against, you know what I mean? Whether it be the Bible or some other, or a novel. I mean, I often think that my main religious reading is my reading, or the novels that I read, actually. Like to think about the self, but I actually think that astrology is another way to do that, like a different way to think about the self. The self is challenged in a way, and you have to think about it from a different angle, so I think there's some
connected to like Jung was
I think it must be Jungian in some way too, like the idea of myth. I mean, I think Jung is coming back too, right? Yeah. Which is really exciting. I mean, that's like very exciting to me. All right, so let's talk about maybe we're near the end, but let's talk about that you've written for children and for young adults, and then like this is an adult novel, and I thought maybe you could just talk about the experience of those different ways of writing and how they're different. I mean, I'm always very confused by this, because I mean, one of my novels, Sister Goldenhair, at first there was a feel like, is it a young adult novel? Is it an adult novel? And I could never really figure out why rather than my other books, there was confusion about it. And I thought it was partly because it was about a teenager, which so is young adult. But I think it also had to do with maybe the way things were treated in the book itself. And I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I think it's an interesting time because there's so many great books that are supposedly for young adults.
Yeah.
Can be very raw. Like, right?
Yeah. I think it's a blurry line. But usually I think if it's very much told from a teenager's point of view, and also with the idea that the reader doesn't know more about life than a teenager. Like the reader is in the same place as the teenager.
Right.
Emotionally and in terms of experience. And so it's written for that reader, not for an adult who's looking back on their own teen years or who maybe knows more about life than the protagonist does.
Right.
So it's kind of an angle thing.
So it has to do with sort of the point of view, but it's confusing because there are still so many books that are supposedly for adults that are from kids' points of view. It's like it's a confusing. I mean, we're sort of out of that phase now, but for a long time, that the kind of the genius child. I mean, that was the McSweeney's thing, right? Like, the very talented like whiz kid was like the focus of many adult novels. I mean, that it seems like those books were coming out a lot, like for.
You mean like Ballinger, like the Glass family,
or even later though, there were, I'm not gonna be able to remember all of them, but there were a lot of them, just about very gifted kids, it'd be interesting to think about that more too.
Special Topics in Calamity Physics.
Yeah, that one was one. Yeah. And then there was the one about the one that was a map making 12-year-old. Remember that one? But there's a whole bunch of them. And I enjoyed a lot of them too, but like, I often wondered like, why is this? Like, what is this? It's like, did you enjoy writing this book more than when you write for like a younger audience, or?
I don't know if I would say that. It took me at least 5 years to write this. So there were definitely long periods where I was not enjoying it. I rewrote it many times.
Yeah, I remember.
And it was very hard. And it took me a long time to figure out what the story was and what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy the freedom of knowing that I could write about a period of time that's 30 or 40 years ago and not worry that my readers hadn't been born yet and didn't know what I was talking about if I talked about a phone booth or a record player or, what I mean?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so there could be more just like stuff that was already in the book that you would just know that like an adult would recognize, like one way or the other. Like even someone in their 20s would sort of have a sense of what a phone booth was, right?
Yeah. And then of course, behavior, adult behavior.
Adult behavior, yeah.
And then too, I'm not sure how much most kids are interested in terms of certain adult relationships. This book doesn't have a lot about marriage and stuff in, but I don't think a kid usually wants to read, a story about a married couple's tensions or something. I mean, not usually.
Yeah,
Might.
I could see how that would not be like, yeah, like a big topic for the kids. All right. I think that's all my questions. I think Kimberly has a couple, right? Do you want to jump
Yeah,
in?
we have a couple questions from
Oh,
people,
great.
myself,
Amazing.
people who have sent in, and then those of y'all who are also here with us live. If you have any questions, please, pop them in there. But the first question is mine, and actually a question Darcy asked. Maybe it has shown a little bit of light on it, but so much of your book, in this maybe a very odd comparison, but reminded me of The Sun Also Rises in ways I know I don't mean to, but it really did, just in ways, the immediacy of the partying that everybody's doing and how you enter in those conversations and how you're there. And then as Darcy was asking about shame, that complete lack of shame, I was thinking that may have had a part of it. But in one of your interviews referenced in the book club guide, you talk about the Nan Goldin photographs and the lost generation of then versus the 80s generation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit to that whole, I don't know, it's mixing around in my mind, and you've put it there from your book. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit to that.
I can't believe that you mentioned The Sun Also Rises, because that's my favorite Hemingway novel. And I read it in high school, and it had a huge impression on me. And I did think about it when I was writing this book, because one thing I loved about that novel was the glamour of it. That it was about this kind of surface of glamour of this lost generation in Europe, going around from Paris to Spain, and bullfights and everything. And then this sadness underneath.
Totally comes through. I mean, that's what you've created. That's what you've placed in the Lower East Side in this different time. Absolutely and completely.
The other thing is, I remember thinking, so then I was in high school. I already wanted to be a writer, and I loved Hemingway and Fitzgerald. But I thought about Lady Brett, the character in The Sun Also Rises. And I just felt first I felt oh, I'm supposed to be her. But then I thought, wait, well, I want to write a story where she tells the story.
Right.
Not Jake, the guy.
Yeah.
I'm getting chills because that's how I read it. She was.
I love that. I love that. I love that. I love your question. It's so good. I haven't read that book in so long. The one thing I can identify with what you're saying is, because I remember the idea of the parties and the glamour, and that's the thing that's so amazing about reading this book right now. When we all can't go out, we can't go out to clubs, we can't go out and have dinner with our friends, and to read about nightlife is just I found it to be such a, there was so much longing in me for my own past nightlife, but also just some nightlife now. I mean, it's such a great book to read now, because if you want to go out, it's you can't. It's the next best thing is to read Astrid Sees All.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's true.
It's such a beat, and there's a couple more questions coming in. Let's see here. One question, as we're talking about, well, actually, I'm going to wait and disjointedly go back to one of another question. So there's so much performance in the book. There's the mirroring, the mirror with Ivan, and there's the performance art that's happening, and so much of it is about being seen. And I was wondering if that was something you were thinking about as you were writing the books. You have the movie tickets, seeing the movie, and I was wondering what it is about being seen in the novel. Is that something you were thinking about as you were writing it, or is that something that just appeared?
I was thinking about that Phoebe sort of thinks of her life as a movie. I think a lot of people do. So that idea that she's living in a movie she wants it to be a good movie where interesting things happen, you know, and she's sort of trying to make her life the best movie she can make it. And I guess part of that is also other people seeing you, watching you live your life, which I hadn't thought about explicitly, but yeah, now that you say that, I think certainly the culture of the East Village then was very much about performance. Performance art was becoming a big thing.
Mm.
And it was like, there's a show that takes place in the nightclub where Phoebe works, where it's like a game show where people do these silly skits, and people used to really do things like they play this Russian roulette with squirt guns, and one squirt gun has ketchup in it. And it's just like they take these two girls into just take turns shooting the squirt gun at their head, water, 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 and then finally ketchup, and that's the whole act. But it was this kind of like a carnival sense or circus atmosphere of just everyone's just gonna get on stage and do the craziest things for entertainment, and there's this ironic undertone, but
Yeah,
It
exactly.
totally comes through.
Yeah.
Tim D has a question, and I will read it word for word. He says, what can you tell us about the genesis of this extraordinary, luminous, transcendent sentence from page 11? If you don't go at least a little crazy when your favorite person dies, something is wrong with you.
aw.
That's funny. That's funny.
I mean, I don't always remember, you know, you go into a kind of trance when you're writing, and then you come out, and sometimes the next day you read what you wrote and you don't even remember writing it. But I do remember I struggled with a lot of the things about Phoebe and her father's death, because my father is still alive, which is good.
Yeah.
But I have experienced people's deaths, but not the death of a parent yet. So I was really worried that I was going to get it wrong. But whenever I tried to imagine it, and when I saw friends of mine go through it, I thought, and when I went through my reactions to the deaths of other people, there is this sense, it's like you sort of go crazy.
You do, yeah.
Like even when one of my cats died, right afterwards, like I remember seeing a giant water bug flew at me, and I thought, it's my cat reincarnated. It really felt real. I would see him everywhere, and I don't think that's unusual that you go into this weird state.
Yeah, it puts you in it's like you're half with them in their world, in the spirit world, and you're half with yourself in your adult world. It takes you a long time to shake shake off. I mean, not shake off, but get back to the real world. You know what I mean? And during that time, it can be very luminous too, and kind of like, and numinous too, but there is something like, something very, like there's sort of like you're half, you only feel like half yourself is there in a way. Like, I mean, that's how I felt like when my mom died. And there is a lot of not rationalness. Like I remember, I mean, myself thinking a lot about how, and Phoebe did remind me of this, like, it's like, well, you want to distract yourself, but also the idea of like, where do they go? Like it becomes a real question, you know what I mean? Like where before it was just abstract, you know? So like, and so you are haunted by these things. They're different than you think, because they're really not that poetic. They're like very like concrete, you know?
Yeah.
I think there was another question too about 20-year-olds and COVID. Did you see that question?
There are. I was going to loop back around to that at the end, but we can go straight there. So Ann Sales has asked about the adventurous exploration of being a 20-something in the 1980s that Phoebe, you've expressed through Phoebe, and in contrasting that with the experience of a 20-something in a pandemic city today. And as you were experiencing the pandemic yourself and preparing this book to come out, did you reflect on that at all, or did any feelings come up around that?
Well, the book was finished before the pandemic started. So I didn't think about it while I was writing the book, but I have thought a lot about young people now going through this past year and counting, and how hard it would have been for me to be so limited in, I mean, I think young people need to socialize it and see each other, and you know, my life, and they're starting out, also they're starting to look for jobs and trying to figure out what they want to do, and that requires going out into the world and meeting people and trying things, which would be really hard to do right now. And so I have felt really, my heart goes out to them, because like I'm pretty settled.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been that bad for me to just
Mhm.
stay home. But
Mhm.
when I was 22, I would have gone crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I know, I mean, I have a 25-year-old, so I know it's been hard for her. I mean, particularly, I mean, you know, like live music, you know, is something is really a big thing. You know, I think if you love music, and there's so much of it in New York in so many different ways. And I think that that's a huge loss, because that like brings joy actually into your body, you know, I mean, to hear live music, you know,
Yeah.
so to miss that, I think is a really big loss. Yeah, a big loss.
And they missed
Um,
all their milestones, graduations, and things,
yeah, like the high school kids. Yeah, that's really hard.
dances.
Yeah,
And it's, I feel bad for them.
me too.
Well, I'm going to kind of combine two questions here. One, starting with what part of the book gives you the biggest pain of nostalgia, and another question that complements the real life characters and moments so particular to the 80s, that are now not remembered by anybody under 50. So it's a two-pronged question. What's in there that gives you the biggest pain of nostalgia? And then also, what essential pieces of now do you think have the potential to disappear in this in the same way that some of these things have fallen off from back then?
Mhm.
Oh, those are hard questions. Hmm.
Or Darcy, what
What-
while she's thinking, what, as you were
Yeah.
reading the book, what gives you the biggest pain of nostalgia from the 80s?
Um, it's more like the idea that anything could happen. I mean, I have, believe me, I have like an amazing life, and I mean, it is restricted because of COVID, but the variety of anything could happen is bigger in your 20s. I mean, I really felt like the idea that like, and also, you know what I missed, which is going to sound terrible, but like, I miss the, like, you meet someone for drinks, then you go have dinner somewhere, then you go have a beer in the park, and the night goes on forever and you don't want to go home.
That's
I mean,
true.
I have to say, I love going out with my friends, but I always want to go home, you know, like, and just to have the energy and the life interest to like go from like, you know, 7 or 8 o'clock all the way to 2 or 3 in the morning, you know, that just seems like that gave me a certain amount of nostalgia. Like, and I mean, partly because I know that will never happen again. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I thought that part of my life is over. Like there was something about just the serendipity of the nights, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, I always remember once I'm going home and it was getting light, and this guy in a tux came with his big cello, you know, and it was just so beautiful, like just to see this guy in his tux, like rolling his cello along, like, you know, as
Yeah.
it was starting to get light, like in New York City, like, I don't know, just the full on night, like a night, like you would have serious nights, you know?
That's true.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that to me, I'm nostalgic for that, like for sure.
I do miss that.
I miss that. Yeah. I mean, that was really fun. I mean,
Yeah.
really fun. Actually, too, like the high fun. I mean, I have a lot of fun now and I have a lot of joy. I also have peace, which I don't think I had as much as you have then, but a sort of like free funness. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like you do capture, I mean, a lot of hard things happen to her and she's struggling a lot, but the idea of just this sort of a light funness, you know, a light feeling of joy, like that's something that I could use more of in my life.
Yeah.
I'm going to figure out how to cultivate it more, you know.
Well, I was thinking, when I think about my 20s, I think I had a lot of fun, but I wasn't very happy.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
you could say I wasn't very happy, but I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Which, and that's what I was trying to have Phoebe experience.
Right. Because the level of anxiety, I was so anxious so much of the time. but I was also really having fun
Because
too.
you
I don't know.
know what's going to happen to you, and if you're
Yeah,
okay, and
I
you're
know.
going to be able to do what you want to do. And
Yeah. Speaking of fortune telling, I have a funny story about this where I think this happened right after I got out of college. So it was in the 80s. And I went to a fortune teller and a card reader or something, like with some friends. And I said, am I gonna, be with the person I'm with now? Or when am I gonna meet my like long-term partner? And they were like, well, like I kept turning over cards, not your current one, not your next one either, not your one after that. It just kept going on and on. And finally, after about 12, like she was like, I don't know what to tell you, honey. I always
She was
think of that.
wise. She was
It was
probably
really
right.
wise, and it was kind of happened. I mean, I'm on my second husband, and we got married 10 years ago, and like we're extremely happy, but it took a long time, but I always think of that.
What struck me, the nostalgia of the book for the 20s was just the fact that everybody, you have a conversation with everybody, and that comes through, I think, so clearly in the book. But talking about the second part of the question, from Martha Jocelyn, what essential pieces of now do you think might disappear in the same way, which is a really hard question.
Martha, that's a very hard question.
Or what are other things from the let me reframe it a little bit. What are things from the 80s that you were so excited to drop in there, like little Easter eggs that are hidden in the book, that people might sit back and smile about or discover for the first time as this reaches people who were not in their 20s in the 80s?
I guess one thing was the nightclub in the novel is called Plutonium, and it's based on a real nightclub called Area there just has never been anything like it since, where they would redecorate it every 6 weeks, just like in the book, except I had it every month, with a totally new theme. And the themes would be, martyrdom or red or childhood. And they would have sets and people acting things out in these dioramas and all kinds of things. And there was this feeling of art everywhere, especially downtown. Like there was a beach. I wanted to work this in. I don't think I managed to, but where Battery Park City is now, there was a beach and the World Trade Towers would sort of loom over it. And it was this no man's land off of Tribeca and this beach. And they would have, art on the beach, performances and things. And it just seemed like the city felt like it was just bursting with art. And I liked putting those things in, and the funny names of the galleries, like International with Monument, would be named after whatever it was I think a gravestone store or something. I don't know. Just the sense of humor and the sense of art everywhere. And experimentation.
You have so many lines in the book, just Scotch tape, it tastes like Scotch, and that Phoebe says, or the laundry soap looks like snow. Now, have you been gathering those forever to place in there? And you said you've been working on this book for 5 years before you sent it off. How many iterations did this take, as you moved from your story to what became, well, as you and I have completely decided, the 1980s Sun Also Rises?
Yeah.
I love that.
Run with it. Take it everywhere. And
Yeah,
give me credit.
it is
girl from the Country
Bookshop. It's
Bookshop.
really good. It is really, really good. I completely approve.
Has that Hemingway thing on it. I watched the first episode last night, and it was about The Sun Also Rises.
Interesting. Yes, one.
Yeah, I mean, that was in that episode. It was about his childhood and his Paris years.
Yeah,
and
I want to watch that.
Well, one thing is I have index cards. I buy a lot of index cards, and I have those little index card cases. And whenever I have any kind of idea at all, a title, a name, a joke, a phrase, something I saw, something I overheard, I write it on a card and I put it in those files. And then when I'm working on a new project, I flip through them and pull anything I think might fit the project.
Cool.
And I actually don't think that scotch tasting like scotch tape or the snow looking like ivory snow came from a card, but some things do. Those I think just, I've always thought that about scotch, that it tastes like scotch tape. And then it seems weird that it's also called scotch.
And you finally got to use it.
Right. I'm like, yes.
Because like in a kid's book and like a book for for middle year kids, it wouldn't really work as well.
No.
I knew when I read that, I'm like, she believes this in her core. Like only someone who believes this in their core has.
Right.
I don't think it's a bad taste, but anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think I rewrote it completely, like starting all over again, at least 5 times. Because that's how I work. Unfortunately, it seems like, so it's a very labor intensive, long way to work. But yeah, I mean, I just put in like everything I remembered and things that happened to me, and then that didn't work. And then gradually start taking them out and replacing them with more and more fictional things until the characters are unrecognizable as people that they were ever based on. And then I know, okay, now I'm on the right track.
Yeah. So you do like a kitchen sink draft, right? I do that too. And then do you save, like as you rewrite more and more, do you save chunks of it or not? Do you just rewrite completely new?
I might save some of it. It's hard to remember now. Like they say it's like childbirth, that you can't remember once it's over. But I mean, if there's something I really liked, probably what I would do is save it and then eventually be like, I gotta face facts. I have to let this go. Like I liked it, but it's not working anymore. It was there because I liked it, and cut it.
Right.
Well, we are about to close, and I will close this out. But before we do, Darcy, is there anything else you want to ask or say about the book before I let Natalie have the same opportunity?
I just really think that everyone should read it. Everyone should also like buy copies for their friends, because they're not going to not like it. I'll just be really honest about it. It is a book. I mean, I love all different kinds of books. Sometimes I like books that I know other people won't like, you know what I mean? Like, but I love those books too. But this is a book that like I loved. It's incredibly well written. It's really deep, and it, your friends will like it too. So it's an important book to also, I think, like share with other people too, you know, not just read yourself. That's something to say. It's true, but it's the truth. It's true. It's true.
Natalie, before I let you close us out, I will include here in the chat, there is a book club, link to a book club, which I will also email to everybody who registered, a great book club kit. And somebody asked what age this book is for. I think I would probably not sell it. Well, if they were with their parent and they were under 17, or 18, I would not sell it to them in the bookshop. Now we're in North Carolina, so that might not go nationwide. But I would say anybody from older teenager, 19, 20, all the way up, who has lived, who just loves fun and Hemingway and New York City and the Lower East Side, and wants to read something. You know, Colleen's on here, and she's going to read it to disappear in the nightlife. You know, somebody else is going to read it with their mom because they both love The Sun Also Rises, and then have that as a book club combination. I really think this book can appeal to anybody. And what I love about it is it's very male or female. It's from the female point of view, but I think what's in there and all the stuff you can talk about it is not pigeonholed for just a certain group. And it can be read in a literary way. It can be read in a very surface way. And they're both completely satisfying reads. So
I like that. I think that's
everyone who can read about drugs and sex.
Yeah.
But Natalie,
and also female freedom, you know?
Yeah.
Like female freedom.
It's so true.
And celebrating female freedom, right?
Yeah, but I think men seem to like it too, partly because I think culturally it appeals to them, like the music
Yeah.
and the stuff that she
Yeah.
does is stuff that
Yeah.
men like to do too. You
But
know?
I hope men want to read about female freedom too.
Yes, of course.
I'm not saying no men just because of female freedom. I'm hoping that will bring them on over. You know what I mean? Yeah.
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 Well, I want to thank y'all so much. Natalie, it is an honor to speak with you on your book launch day.
Oh.
If we were in person, we might not even be able to have this conversation for the Country Bookshop, but I wish I could toast you right now in celebration of this book on this night. And it is a true joy to meet you, Darcy, and you, Natalie, through this. And I want to thank everybody for watching this. You can buy this book from us. You can get an autographed copy. I put in the chat and I'll put on this video. I have all Darcy's books listed. I have all Natalie's books listed. If you have a 12-year-old and don't want to give this content book to her, Natalie's got you covered, and we can send that to you. So that'll also be on there. And I want to thank you guys, and come see us at the Country Bookshop. Read Astrid Sees All. Tell everybody about it. It's going to be the book of the summer. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Kimberly and Darcy.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.